Way back in 1984, Madonna came out with a hit song called Material Girl. Anybody remember that song? Yeah, the chorus goes, "We're living in a material world and I'm a material girl." Now, about that same time, physicists were studying the material world, and they were beginning to say, wait a minute, I don't think the world is actually made of material. I think it's made of something else. One of those physicists is named Thomas Campbell, and he wrote a book called My Big Toe. TOE is an acronym for Theory of Everything. My Big Theory of Everything. And in that book, Thomas Campbell says that we are not living in a material world. Sorry, Madonna, you were wrong. We're actually living in a world of data. It's all information. And if we can just understand that this material world is not really what's true, we will live differently. Now, some people say it's a world or universe of energy or of spirit, but this is a physicist we're talking about, so he said it's a world of information. Now, Campbell says that we have two ways of being in this world. We can assume that the world is material, and if we do that, we will live in the way of fear. Now, think about what we see around us every day. We see 90% of the resources held by 3% of the people. We see leaders saying we are going to make war on this country or that country, or we are going to take their land or their minerals or their resources. We are going to kill these people because we want their land. They take. The way of fear has an ethic to it. And that ethic is your rule book, if you will. It's how you operate in the way of fear. And it is power, control, and force. That's what gets you That's how you win if you live in a material world. You get more material. But if you look at the whole of the universe, as Campbell tries to, he found that there is another way to be, that we don't have to operate in the way of fear. We can operate in the way of love. And the ethics for that way of being in the world are compassion and kindness and cooperation. Now, keep in mind, this is a physicist who is saying this, not a philosopher. A physicist has studied for years and come up with this theory of everything, that there are two ways of being in the world, and we get to choose. And he was not the first one to do this. Because in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 14, we also see there are two ways of being in the world. Now, in our reading today, obviously, Jesus is living and showing us the way of love, right? So let's talk about that way first. In this story, which Kathy pointed out is foundational to the Christian faith, we have Jesus feeding the 5,000, which is just the men, not counting the women and children, right? And that story is a foundational story for Christians from day one. It's in all four Gospels, one of the few stories that are in all four. And every Christian, anybody who was following Jesus, would have known about this story because it was that important then, and it still is now. So Jesus has heard something, and he wants to be alone. So he goes off by himself, and people are following him. He's on the water, they're on the land, and when he finally docks the boat somewhere, there's a crowd waiting for him, and he has compassion on them. Then he heals all of their sick. He spends the day with them, showing kindness, and then, of course, the disciples say, hey, it's getting late. We're in the middle of nowhere. We're actually in the wilderness. There is no McDonald's, no Dollar General. There's no Speedy Mart. Send everybody home. They've got to have time to get home and prepare a meal. And of course, Jesus said, no, you feed them. So in the story already, we see Jesus responding with compassion. And then we see him acting out of kindness. And now he is calling for cooperation. These are the ethics of Thomas Campbell's way of love. And of course, the disciples don't know what to do, so Jesus says, bring me what you have. And he does exactly what we remember at the communion table. Jesus took the bread, and he thanked God for it, and he broke it, and he gave it. And of course, there was enough for everyone. It was a miracle. 12 baskets left over, and 5,000 people fed. How incredible. That's the way of love, where there's abundance for all, where you can come and eat with no cost and no money. You just come and you are safe and you are fed and you're cared for. So where in Matthew's gospel is the way of fear? Well, to see that one, we'd have to go back just a few verses, still in chapter 14. What is it that Jesus heard at the beginning of our reading today that made him want to go off by himself? He heard that John the Baptist had been executed, and he was grieving. And that's why he got in the boat and went away by himself. He needed to grieve for the death of this prophet. Now, if we go back to Matthew 14 at the beginning, we'll find out that John the Baptist has been languishing in prison for a while, and Herod is having a banquet. It is a banquet for the rich and the powerful. He has a lavish table. Now, contrast that for a moment with Jesus' picnic in the wilderness, with the baskets of the fish and the loaves and whatever else people threw into those baskets, because I know once somebody starts to share, everybody starts to share. Herod has a table that is opulent with fancy food and servants serving all of these rich and powerful people around the table, and there is a young woman who dances for their entertainment. And King Herod says to this woman, "Your dancing is so wonderful. It's so marvelous that I will give you whatever you ask for." Now, he says this in front of all of these other rich and very powerful people. And the girl, of course, goes and talks to her mother. They have a conference, and her mother says, "Ask for the head of that prophet, John the Baptist, on a plate." And the girl asks, and Herod must do it, because he has said in front of everyone that he will do whatever she asks. He is manipulated. He is forced into doing something, because what are the ethics of the way of fear? Control and power and force. He is forced to kill John the Baptist. And at this banquet table, we have this macabre scene where the next passing dish is a plate with a severed head. That is the way of fear. Because that tells everybody in that room, everybody that sees it or hears about it, they will know that if you do not do what the powerful tell you to do, this is what will happen to you. I don't think that Matthew put these two stories together by mistake. I think that Matthew started with one banquet, this banquet of fear, and then contrasts it with this banquet of love that Jesus shows us. Now, for all of us, we can see this now clearly, right? A way of love, a way of fear. We all want to be on the side of love. That's why we're all in this room today. That's why we're tuned in online, because we want to choose the way of love. But it's difficult because sometimes we slip into the way of fear because most of the world lives there. We have to know how to work in that world. And I know for myself, I slip back and forth. I try to be in the way of love, honest, I do. But all I have to do is listen to too much news, and I am in the way of fear. All I have to do is think for a moment, if we could just take the leader of this country and the leader of that country and just put them in a room together and let them fight it out, and when they're gone, things will be better. I have slipped right into the way of fear. That's power, control, and force. That is not the way of love. In World War II, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a Lutheran pastor, he struggled with this because he thought he should assassinate Hitler. But he knew it wasn't quite right. But he struggled so much, he finally decided that he would try it. And he did try it, and he was arrested. But it's so easy as a good person, as a loving person, to slide into this trap of thinking that if I can just force something to happen, that everybody will be better off. Now, even in our reading today, even in this story about this feeding of the 5,000, there is temptation. And in 2026, we will read the story and not see the temptation in it. First of all, Jesus is in the wilderness again. Last time in Matthew's gospel that he was in the wilderness was chapter 4. And he was starving, and he was tempted to turn stones into bread for himself, to save himself, and he refused. Today, there are 5,000 plus people around him, and he does create bread. But he doesn't do it for himself. He does it for the good of all. But there is another temptation here in this story, and it has to do with that number 5,000, which has always bugged me every single time I hear this story. The men get counted and the women and children don't count. What's new? It used to bother me every single time until I understood the significance of the number 5,000. 5,000 is the number of a Roman legion. If Rome wants to send an army into a city and take it over, they will send a legion, 5,000. And Jesus has at his disposal 5,000 well-fed, healthy men who are waiting for his next command. That's the temptation. Jesus can very easily leave this way of love and veer off into the way of fear. And he can call for a revolution, and he can overthrow Rome, and he can do it that day. But he doesn't. That's the lesson in this story, that we have these two ways of being, and Jesus consistently chooses the way of love, even when he has other avenues open to him. Science knows that there's a way of love and a way of fear. Psychology Today, a couple of years ago, had an article called The Wisdom of Compassion. And in it, we learn that if we are compassionate, if we are loving in our lives, we will have better health. We'll be happier. We'll have less anxiety. We'll have more joy. We know that's true. We know it up here sometimes, but down here, it doesn't always get down here. But science has known it for a while. This is nothing new for them. Thomas Campbell says that if just 10% of our population, about 1 billion people, if they all chose the way of love just in their own lives, it would be enough of a tipping point to change all of humanity, that it would shift our future. It would change everything. It would take a few decades, but it would shift. And then if a dictator called for an army to invade another country, nobody would show up to fight that fight, because we would know power and force and control, that's not Jesus' way. And we would follow the way of love. So what does compassion look like to you? What does love look like to you? For Jesus that day, it was the shape of the fish. And that's significant because all the Christians, the early Christians after this point, they all used the symbol of the fish to show that they followed Jesus' teaching. The fish was so significant. It was not the cross until 300 years later. The cross was the sign of the way of fear, remember. This is what empire does to you when you don't play by the rules of this fear game. So the fish was the symbol of Christianity for a long time. Now, nothing wrong with redeeming a symbol from the other side, right? But the shape of compassion for the early Christians was the fish. So I'm just wondering, what is the shape of our compassion? What does your compassion look like? For some of you, it's a blanket that you make and you give. For some of you, it's a package of diapers that you share with someone in need. Some of us, the shape of our compassion looks a lot like our checkbook, because that's the easiest way that we can give. For some of us, it's a musical instrument. For some of us, it's sitting with a friend. For our church, it's this logo showing a bird's eye view of 4 people gathered in communion, supporting one another and taking care of one another. So if you had to give your compassion, your love, a shape, what would it be?